On Wednesday, Republic reported on the independent panel report that was published as far as WHO's role on the COVID pandemic is concerned. The independent panel had said that some countries kept the wait-and-see approach during the early months of the outbreak, which could have prevented the pandemic. But there are many who disagree and we have one such critic joining us on Republic TV right now. Professor Lawrence Gostin, who's a professor from Georgetown University and director at WHO Center on Global Health Law. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. And welcome to Republic TV, Professor Gostin, and thank you for speaking to us. Professor Gostin, my first question to you would be, you have said that the panel fails to call out bad actors like China, perpetuating the dysfunctional WHO tradition of diplomacy over frankness, transparency and accountability. If you could elaborate on the statement that you made, why do you feel so?
Well, I do agree that there was a lot of blame to go around, and that the pandemic has been amplified by the fact that China didn't report early to the World Health Organization, and also that countries, even when they knew, didn't react well, including the United States with President Donald Trump. But there's a long tradition at WHO. I've worked at with WHO for many decades. I've written lots of reports for them. And there's a diplomatic nicety that you should never name a bad actor, never name a government, never name a political leader. But the truth is that sometimes we do need to call out bad actors. We do need to be honest and transparent when an individual or a country is impeding the global response. And so I think that the independent panel could have done a service to WHO. It could have given it political cover if it itself had called out names, including China, but also populist leaders like Bolsonaro or Donald Trump, or perhaps even Prime Minister Modi in India for the current wave that you're experiencing.
Professor, there is one more question in concern to China. Now, there is a 2015 report allegedly authored by Chinese military officials and is with the US State Department right now that indicates that coronavirus could be a bioweapon. Now, what are your views on this report and on this development?
Well, I think, there's been a long-standing concern that the initial pandemic was originated at the Wuhan Institute laboratory. The WHO report on the origins of the pandemic found that that was highly unlikely, and that much more likely was a natural, what we call zoonotic spillover, that is a natural occurring event where a virus in a bat through an intermediary animal then infected a human and started the pandemic. More than 70% of all novel outbreaks are naturally occurring, and it's very, very rare for a lab. So I do think it's unlikely that it started in the Wuhan lab, but nonetheless, I support scientists who are now calling for China to allow a full and unfettered investigation, both at the Wuhan lab, but also throughout China, and particularly southern China, because it's, I think, unconscionable that with all of this suffering and all of these deaths, that the world still doesn't know how the virus began. And we have a right to know. We have a right to know because it'll help us end this pandemic, but also it'll help us prevent the next pandemic. And so China needs to cooperate with the rest of the world and with the World Health Organization.
Yes, and Professor, taking forward from this point that you just made, how do you think global powers and world leaders can seek accountability on the spread of this pandemic? Because we saw how WHO investigated into the COVID origin a few months back, but that investigation has been inconclusive. So is there something more that can be done?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern about how we can get, large geopolitical actors, principally China, but also the United States, the European Union, major powers like India, to always cooperate with international authorities and to have international authorities be able to independently verify their reports and to gain access to their territory to investigate and also to help in the outbreak response. There's a lot of ideas on the table right now. The World Health Assembly is coming up this month, in the next week or two. One of the things that the independent panel report and also the WHO itself through Dr. Tedros is supporting a new pandemic treaty. And that pandemic treaty should have strong provisions for enforcement, compliance, and also for transparency and accountability. But the world's powers are going to have to all get behind it.
Professor, there's one more controversy that has now erupted, and I would like you to elaborate on that. There are reports of Dr. Fauci's organization funding some research at Wuhan lab. There are some links that have been drawn. So if you can talk about that, and if you can tell us if this fact can be ignored or is there something more to it?
Yeah, I mean, I know Tony Fauci very well. We've been friends for more than 20 years now. And we fought together, since the AIDS pandemic and Zika and Ebola. He's a man of honesty. The claims that the United States supported what's so-called gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab are false. What the NIH did do is it gave a grant to the EcoHealth Alliance to study the genetic composition of coronaviruses in bats. That was a very worthwhile study to fund. It did get conducted partially at the Wuhan Institute, but it was not funding for so-called gain-of-function research, that is, to be able to enhance the capabilities of a coronavirus or to in any way make it more transmissible or pathogenic. And so I think the claims are false. The National Institutes of Health did give a grant. The grant was for legitimate and important purposes. And I don't think we should be following conspiracy theories.
Thank you very much for putting that into perspective, Professor. My final question to you would be in connection with the announcement that was made by the United States of America last week, because we know that Biden administration has expressed intent to waive off TRIPS for global cooperation on vaccine manufacturing and production. So if you could elaborate something, America's stand on that, as well as if you could tell us how soon is it expected so that countries like India can ramp up vaccine production when India needs it the most?
Yes, India is going through a horrible tragedy right now, and the world really needs to get behind the Indian people and to support it, support the people of India with vaccines, with diagnostic kits, with oxygen tanks, and a whole range of medical resources. I think this is really an urgent humanitarian and public health endeavor that the world needs to rally around. India and South Africa together put in a proposal to the World Trade Organization to temporarily waive intellectual property rights for vaccines, diagnostics, and treatments during the COVID pandemic. I support that waiver. I support what India and South Africa have asked for, and so has 100 other countries. But the United States, in particular, President Biden, announced recently that he too would support the IP waiver for vaccines, not for the other pharmaceuticals or testing kits. And that was a huge sea change for the United States. I never thought I'd see the day when an American president agreed to waive intellectual property rights against the implacable objections of the pharmaceutical industry. But now it's going to take a lot of time at the WTO to ensure that that waiver will come to fruition. There's still opposition to it from the European Union, the UK, Canada, and others. But I'm hopeful that there will be consensus. But we don't have time to waste. We can't wait, several weeks and even months. We need to do this really quickly. But we also need to do much more than IP waiver. We need to transfer technology and provide increased manufacturing capacity for vaccine companies. And the one that I have in mind that's most important, of course, is the Serum Institute of India, which is the largest vaccine maker in the world. We need to provide the raw materials and the intellectual know-how and the capacity for the Serum Institute and for other vaccine makers to ramp up global supply. This is a global health emergency of unprecedented consequences. We've never seen anything like this in our lifetime. And so we need to do something big and bold, and we can't just go around as business as usual.
Yes, Professor Gostin, that's absolutely right, because this is an unprecedented crisis, like you said, and there are bold steps that are required and greater cooperation between countries that are required. Thank you very much, Professor Lawrence Gostin, for sharing your views on different subjects related to the pandemic with us on Republic TV, and thank you very much for joining us on this special broadcast.